Hello, and welcome to Chapter 14 of my TearRing Saga Champions of Utena low turn count playthrough. As you can see, this chapter is a return to form in terms of the sheer length, and actually there's not very much happening for a large chunk of this map, so I'm going to be filling in the time with some discussion of the story and some of the actual strategic considerations going on in the course of the narrative war, not just the battle itself here. Holmes is currently heading up through Salia, and it's been pretty heavily invaded by the Empire of Canaan. Its remaining army is mostly holed up in the town of Blad, which is surrounded on all sides by enemies. And the enemies that we are fighting in this chapter represent one of the four enemies that are surrounding the Salians. These enemies are a gang of deserters who have taken over the town of Ocus. For the next couple of maps, Holmes is actually going to be helping take the pressure off the Salian forces, and that starts with dealing with these guys. So, in order to deal with these deserters, we are deploying most of the usual suspects. But we are also deploying Bards, because this is the chapter in which we can finally re-recruit Plum. And if Bards doesn't do it, Holmes has to go well out of his way in order to do so instead. We also give Vega a Levin sword so that he can have some 2-range access on this map. And that's going to be very important during this chapter. At the start of this chapter, we need to clear out as many of the enemies surrounding our starting point as possible, and Alicia is going to start that off by showing off her extremely powerful Dire Thunder again. The ultimate goal of this chapter is to get Holmes over to seize the point in the upper left of the map, and we also need to get Bart's over to a certain house to get Plum back. In addition to that, there are a large number of houses that hand out items, and there's also an unusually large number of item drops from enemies on this map. We got a killing edge from the very fast sword unit that Alicia killed with Dire Thunder, and he would have been a real pain to defeat without the brave tome that we have. Meanwhile, Martel got a kill set up for her crit Iron Lance by Lee. That's the other thing we're doing, of course, still trying to build up kills on our critical weapons and putting as much experience into Naron and also Samson as we can manage. Now, in order to achieve the goals that I have, technically neither Holmes nor Bart's needs to move their entire movement on every turn, but Holmes does need to move his entire movement for the first 4 turns, otherwise he will not be in a place that he needs to be on that turn in order to hit the minimum turn count for this chapter. So, as we clear out some of these enemies, let's talk a bit more about the situation in Salia. The city of Blad is surrounded on 4 sides by enemies. To the south, there is the Empire of Canaan's elite troops, and those are going to be dealt with by Runan in his next sequence of maps. Where we are, there's the deserters, which we've already talked about. And then to the north, there are caves that are full of monsters, and they overflow into the northern parts of Salia on a regular basis. Finally, to the east of Blad is Castle Salia itself, which is currently held by a usurper who has aligned himself with the Empire of Canaan. Holmes is ultimately going to have to deal with him as well as the monsters to the north, before we reach his next reunion with Runan's army. On this turn, we are able to let Bart drop a single space so that Naron can take point for some experience points. This is the only leeway that Bart has in getting to his goal, but it's an important one because Bart is somewhat fragile and Naron has all of the leather shields, so he's somewhat less fragile. And Bart also does not need that experience at all. Martel now attacks an enemy next to Naron with the Levin sword, and you'd think that she would be trying to kill it, but she is in fact just chipping it down so that Naron can take that kill on enemy face for a big chunk of experience. Where Martel goes in this map is pretty important. but her flying, 2-range, and canto all combine to allow her to make it wherever she needs to go, and do quite a bit of work clearing the path for Bart and Holmes. At this point, we ensorcel Vega, which might be somewhat unexpected, because Vega has really low magic, and so doesn't actually have all that powerful an offense with the Levin Sword even after the ensorcel. But this is in fact critically important, and it allows Vega to attack on the low resilience of enemies later in the map. Last chapter, at the end, I mentioned an event that could take place on this map if I deployed Krishna. Basically, the story there is that Vega actually murdered Krishna's boyfriend some years ago when he was a ruthless contract killer before he developed a conscience like he has today. Completing this event would have given some support boost between Vega and Shigen, which could have been quite useful in some circumstances during this chapter. However, I didn't activate it, and the reason for that is that activating this event causes Vega and Shigen to have a little duel at the start of this chapter, and that leaves them both at 1 HP afterwards. Obviously, having my best combat unit at 1 HP at the start of the map is a very bad idea, in addition to the action it would have cost to trigger the event, so that's why I didn't end up doing it. The event on the world map happening actually changes a re-recruitment condition on a much later chapter, but I'll discuss that little difference when we get there. One quirk about this chapter that makes it really difficult to come up with a reliable and consistent strategy for is that the enemies have a somewhat random AI, and that's why I am checking the range of a bow soldier here to make sure that Martel is able to canto into a safe space after her action here. When I say the AI is somewhat random, I don't mean it's completely random, because the enemies will still always move to attack you if you are in their range. The randomness comes in whenever they don't have a unit that they can attack on their turn, and it causes them to just move to an unpredictable position. And because of that, it's practically impossible to figure out a way to consistently get them into the same places each time. That means that, in particular, it is sometimes very difficult to make certain spaces in the map safe for Martel to go because of the ability of the bow enemies to deal enormous damage to her. On this run, the bow soldier decided to be very nice to me, staying quite a long way to the upper left, so that Martel has basically free reign wherever I need her to go for the first half of this map. Naron picks up a level here, and he somehow manages to get his second magic level up of this chapter, which is somewhat surprising given his fairly low 15% magic growth. Fortunately, he's also getting some of the stats that he actually needs as well. We're just about finished busting through the tight parts of this town, and the two units that need to be heading for the seize point are Holmes, of course, because he has the seize, and also Vega, who is going to be killing off the boss once we get there. Everyone else is just kind of along for the ride, because there is still a fairly large knot of enemies to go through. Marouge picks up the first of the items from the houses here. This is a smith's hammer, which we are going to use on, I believe, the crit iron lance to keep it alive and continuing to get more crit on it. On this enemy phase, Bart is going to take a major beating. He takes a great lance to the face. Great lances are very strong, but they're also somewhat inaccurate, so it's a bit unfortunate that Bart's got hit here. And it's very, very lucky that he didn't quite get killed by the steel lance hit that followed on from it. Bart spends a fair amount of time in combat during this chapter, and his combat stats really do actually hold up quite well, even 10 or so chapters beyond his recruitment. We are going to have to keep him quite well healed up though, because of all the combat he is forced to see. On that enemy phase, we also saw that a rogue attacked into Lee and committed suicide, giving us the money bag that we were after down there. Like I mentioned, there are a lot of handy enemy drops all over this map. And now at last comes the main event of this chapter, as Bart visits the house and re-recruits Plum for our side, and she comes with a new skill, Dance. Like in all the Fire Emblem games, dancing allows a unit to refresh an adjacent ally, giving them another full movement and turn. And Plum is going to use this ability on Holmes in order to immediately make up the turn cost that she incurred back when we recruited her in Chapter 2. In addition, Plum made use of the convoy feature in order to pull out a miracle charm in order to guarantee her safety on this upcoming enemy phase. This precaution didn't end up being necessary on this run, as we kill off the majority of the physical enemies who really threaten her on this player phase before they get a chance to attack her. With her new dance skill, Plum is now more or less the queen of turn saves, and she is going to be used constantly for the rest of this game. We now pick up another item from a house. This is an occult book, and to describe what this does, I'm going to need to talk about the mechanics of promotion a bit more. In this game, like in most Fire Emblem games, the level cap of a base class is 20. Unlike in most Fire Emblem games though, when you promote in this game, your level does not reset to 1. Instead, your current level at time of promotion is added to your level cap. So if you promote at level 10, that gets added to your starting level cap of 20 to give you a new level cap of 30. This maxes out at a level cap of 40, which happens if you promote at level 20. Pre-promoted units tend to have a starting level cap of 30, and we are going to need to break that cap at some point later in the game, and that is what the occult book allows us to do. When you use it on a unit, it raises their level cap by 10. This means that you can use 1 on a unit that you promoted at level 10 in order to allow them to reach the maximum level of 40. In normal gameplay, this almost never comes up, except for units that have the Paragon skill, because there's not really enough experience in this game for units to reach level 40 in the first place. Now, on the previous player phase, I also picked up a hero crest from one of the houses using Alicia, and that leaves just one house on this chapter that I have not yet visited, over in the right-hand side of the map. If I was to visit this house, I would be given the option to hand over 600 gold, and the unit that did so would then receive +1 luck. As you can imagine, this isn't very valuable. There are a couple of houses like this throughout the game, and they do have another purpose, but I'm never actually going to be able to make use of that second purpose. So this is just a 600 gold for +1 luck house, and that's not really worth it at all for any of my units. Plum is now dancing for the second time so that Vega can reach the boss on the Seize Point. This is why I had him ensorcelled by Mel earlier in the map, because that gives him just enough power to one-round KO this boss and free up the Seize Point for Holmes to take shortly. This boss kill is fairly unreliable, but I do have a couple of other units in range of the boss, such as Martel, who are able to clean up if Vega misses one of his attacks. Since he did not, they are now free to take some kills on the last remaining enemies, which notably allows us to pick up an extra leather shield from one of the enemies. Afterwards, I dawdle around a bit, but eventually decide that Mel also wants some healing experience. Levels on her are kind of exciting because there's always the tiny chance that she'll get movement, and she will also eventually get Canto if you get enough levels on her. Not that I do. Anyway, once that is all said and done, Holmes moves in to seize and end the chapter in 5 turns. Afterwards, As a reward for his heroic deeds, Holmes is given access to the town's treasure room, which is full of treasure chests, and we are allowed to pick any 5 that we want. Most of these treasure chests merely contain money bags, but I know where the good stuff is. There are lots of promotion items in here, but I don't pick up any of those because I don't really need all that many units promoted, and I have plenty of promotion items anyway. Instead, we're going to pick up 3 very important stat boosters: an energy potion for strength, a wing potion for speed, and a spirit potion for magic, in addition to an Azoth, which is a resurrection item that I briefly mentioned in Chapter 5, and a brave crossbow to augment Holmes's offensive power and reliability on the upcoming maps. There are a couple of other good items among these chests, including a physics staff in one of them, but Holmes is already building up way too many of those, so I don't bother grabbing that one. Afterwards, we go shopping, because I need a fresh armor slayer after giving both of my ones to Runan at the start of the last reunion. We additionally pick up 2 door keys here, and they are incredibly important, but the reason why will not become obvious until the very end of this run. I've picked up quite a few items that don't need to be in anyone's inventory at the moment, so I'm going to spend a fair chunk of time here just clearing out inventories and making sure everyone has only what they need for the next combats. At the end of this sequence, I finally reunite Plum with her in-armor staff, and we are going to be seeing that used a couple of times in upcoming maps as well. If you've been paying attention to my levels, you'll notice that Naron is still only level 8, so he still needs another 2 levels in the upcoming chapters in order to promote, and we really need to accelerate him because he is going to be the main offensive force on some of those chapters. With all that said and done, this lengthy chapter finally comes to an end. Thank you for watching all the way through, and I will see you next time.